Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would first like to wish everyone blessings on the birth anniversaries of Imam Husayn, peace be upon him, Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, and Hazrat Abbas, peace be upon him. I would like to extend a thank you to Al-Huda youth who have graciously put this event together. It's important to have these conversations, and I'm honored to be part of such a vital program. Thank you to all the volunteers who have worked tirelessly to do this work. I am a sister by the name of Sakina Hasib. I grew up in the Greater Toronto area, and I'm the daughter of Brother Ali Hasib, an Afro-Trinidadian convert, as well as the daughter of Sister Layla Hasib, who is a white American convert from North Carolina. I'm here as a member of the Muslim community who humbly hopes to share some ideas with you all. I'm here to share a poem, an original piece that I wrote inspired by today's program about racial justice as well as equality in Islam, and addressing some of the concerns specific to the Muslim community. My poem is entitled I Am Black, because I am Black. And I want to share some ideas that the poem addresses that I think might help add some context for the audience. The poem generally addresses three main points. The first one being implicit bias. Implicit bias means having a preference or an aversion to a person or a group of people that we're often unaware of. And this is important because when we're talking about things like racial justice and what falls under that umbrella, including racism, prejudice, shadeism, colorism, oftentimes there are these larger-than-life concepts that are othering, and we don't always attribute to ourselves or our communities or our families. And what the poem hopes to do is create a sense of empathy and understanding, and realizing how the idea of even shadeism or colorism, where lighter skin tone people are put into positions of preference or privilege, often in comparison to their brothers and sisters who have darker skin tones, even within the same ethnic group or the same racial category. It's important for us to think about the ways in which we use language, the ways in which, we approach things like marriage or conversations that we have with our families, our parents, our grandparents' generations, and where are some of these subtext ideas coming from? Are they learned? Where do we pick them up? And how do we get rid of them, and how do we unlearn them, inshallah? The second area that the poem addresses or touches on is unity and getting to know one another. The idea of coming together outside of our bubbles, outside of our ethnic groups, outside of our masajids, and getting to know other Muslims, including indigenous Muslims, Muslims that are from this land, that are connected to this land in this part of the world, in particular Black Muslims, Black Muslim community leaders, and Black Muslim ulama. And it's important because if you aren't connected to the people of the land, then oftentimes we lose out on knowing the true history of the people, knowing the true history of the land. Just like connection to land is important in other parts of the world, to know culture and history and the people. And so that's an invitation for us to kind of, bring people together and get to know one another, inshallah. The third area that the poem addresses is understanding the system. There's a beautiful hadith by Imam Ali alayhi salam that says, "Stand against the oppressor and be a helper of the oppressed." And it's important for us to, especially in the Western world, to know who are the oppressors and who are the oppressed, and to always align ourselves with the oppressed. Always stand in opposition of the oppressor and make sure that we're not condoning or supporting or, really friendly with the oppressors. There is a quote by Shahid Mutahari who says, "Know your shimmer of today. Know the shimmer of today." And as we're celebrating the birth anniversaries of these holy personalities, peace be upon them all, we cannot think about them really without remembering the events and the tragedy of Karbala. And so thinking about shimmer in the relation to Karbala, thinking about Yazid in relation to Karbala, we know that these very much so were the oppressors, and we could never befriend them or people like them or stand alongside anyone who was even supporting them. And so we need to identify who are the shimmers of today, who are the Yazids of today, and make sure that we are always standing, inshallah, against them. Inshallah, without further ado, I will begin my poem entitled, "I Am Black." Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I am black. Not what you expected? Well, let me take you back. I am the daughter of Adam and Hawa. I am black like the black stone of the Kaaba. Our predecessors were dark-skinned. The mother of mankind shone like a star in the night sky. The first creation was named after the earth, complexions of blacks and browns, dust to dirt. As some left the hot sun of the continent, their melanin faded. Unfortunately, they became jaded. Do not forget from whence we came. You, me, your grandfather, your grandmother. The truth is there is no one else to blame. The roots of a plant are what make it strong. Pull them out and it won't live very long. Know the history and understand the pain. Stop the cycle to erase the blemishes and stains. The Ummah was one, but became fractured and divided. Familial, tribal, national ties begun. Us only seeing our differences, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chided. I am black, like a deep song sung from the lungs, lamentations, anthems, and chants. Remember how to some Bilal's voice stung? Either we appreciate each other's gifts or we'll lose the blessings from He who grants. Constantly sacrificing my egotistical nature, I am the prodigy of Sumayya and Yasser who offered their lives for the sake of elevating their stature, time and time again praying our soul survives. Black is bold, black is beautiful, black is beyond your limitations. I am black, like the infinite universe, pervasive like its darkness, all-encompassing as a hearse, subversive like the unconscious. What if I told you I was black like Imam Jawad, peace be upon him, and his son, and his son, and his son, and his son? Like the sun which will rise from the west in the end times. What if I told you they were black? What if I told you I was black? Would you believe that? Wait. Racism, xenophobia, prejudice? No way. Muslims showed up to the table late. Even though the food was rotten, some decided to stay. Often victims of colonization, U.S. imperialism, and cultural genocide, blind trust in a system that makes you barter your soul, tucking in your faith, you hide. Be a model citizen, just play your role. Listen to the news and believe their lies, even when the truth stares you in the eye. Lebanon, Palestine, Afghanistan, Iraq. What about Tulsa, Oklahoma? You ever heard about that? When the U.S. bombed its own, Black Wall Street and African American lives never mattered here, though. Okay, the United States government is the culprit. We live in the Great North, KKK Canada. We not that sick. The destruction of Africville only ended in 1970, and that was on the soil of Nova Scotia, man. What will it take for us to make a stand? Higher rates of police brutality, poverty, and death. Why are black bodies deemed cheap enough to take our breath? Incarceration, institutionalization, and pacification, too. How could we trust the system that makes us taboo? We did not choose to come here. Rather, we were stolen through tears. And even though we built this land, they used us and abused us, then had us all banned. Do not be fooled by Hollywood, capitalism, or the propaganda machine. We are living on a giant graveyard unseen. These lies are orchestrated in history books and followed up with white supremacist looks. Some of you fled to this country. Some of you came to run free. Some of you immigrated to what you believed was better, realizing too late that without your religion and culture would soon make you a forgetter. Malcolm X said, "You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. Civil war, genocide, assimilation will indeed come. Learn the truth before it's too late. Choose love. Please don't continue this hate." I am black, and I'm proud of that. Resilience and perseverance ain't lacking. Hundreds of years of experience we packin'. Work with us and you will see what a force Muslim unity could be. Indigenous, immigrant, refugee, upholders of truth and justice, we are the Mahdi's deputies. The time is now, brothers and sisters. Stand together as resistors. The true legacy of Karbala, and finally fulfill our covenant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد والثناء لرب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope everyone is doing well, and it is great to be reconnected again, even though we're still social distancing and whatnot. It's great to connect again with the community and to be a part of these important conversations. I have just a few points to make about this topic of race inequality, and in reality, it's such a big conversation. It's not one-dimensional. It's not one aspect. It's not, one concept. It's so all-encompassing that it would be difficult to do justice to the depth of this topic, in a session. But what I'd like to do is, 5 or 6 points that are relevant to us better understanding this topic of race and equality, and what does that look like for us as Muslims. Inshallah, we'll highlight these points and answer some questions as well. Obviously want to thank, Sister Sakina for that amazing presentation. Jazakumullah. And the Al-Huda youth that have been working around the clock, literally, to make these programs possible. And I want to appreciate them, inshallah, for all of the volunteers, all of those who have any stake or say, the participants as well. Please, for their benefit and their souls, please recite a salawat for them, inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. I want to start with highlighting the Holy Quran. Surah number 49, verse 13. That's Surah Hujarat. Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. O mankind. So first off the bat, God is talking not to a specific group of people, but to all people. So this is a global and universal message for everyone to learn from. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. I created you from the same single male and female, Prophet Adam and Hazrat Hawa, Adam and Eve. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلًا. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, we made you and placed you into various tribes and nations. Right? Part of what we can take from that is this is intentional. Right? Allah says that if He wanted, could have made everybody one ummah. Made Adam and Eve and 8 billion clones of them, everyone essentially pretty much similar. He says He made you into different nations, different tribes, and all that is entailed in those varying cultures. لِتَعَارَفُوا. Part of it is just for the purpose of knowing one another, for having an identity. And so much in a culture that comes along with that we can learn from, benefit from. Inna akramakum indallah atqakum. And the most important part, that despite whatever differences you see that exist, who's the best, who has superiority, who is more honorable in God's sight. And Allah, from the perspective of God, the most honorable of us is who? The one who is atqakum, who has the most taqwa. Irrespective of where you're from, these different nations and tribes, whatever language you speak, whatever the color of your complexion, at the end of the day, your nobility is in your taqwa. Your nobility is in your decency, your virtue, your practice and belief of religion, your understanding and nearness to God, your piety, your devotion, your God wariness or God consciousness. That's what is the separator from God's perspective. Inna Allah alimun khabir. Of course, Allah is all-knowing and all-aware. He knows all of who we are, what we have done. And He knows that the honor belongs to he who has done the most in terms of getting close to Him, meaning being more God-conscious. And this is a theme that we're going to reflect on. Next, I want to honor the Ahl al-Bayt and really remember them, as this topic and occasion is also connected with the holidays of, these noble personalities, the Imam of considered the most beloved of the inhabitants of the heaven and the earth, and one tradition, Imam Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam. His brother Abul Fadl Abbas, peace be upon him, and Imam Zayn al-Abidin Ali ibn al-Husayn, Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him. And these three noble warriors and leaders, they have some things in common. And one of the things which, besides their honor, their courage, their God consciousness and piety, and their sacrifice, there is Karbala. that they have in common, that this unique, important event that connects them and connects us to them actually as well. And their brotherhood, their sacrifice. And actually, we could say that sacrifice is a part of brotherhood. And I think we need to talk a little bit about this brotherhood, which is one of these elements that are very important to understand when we're trying to understand this gargantuan and very important topic. First of all, brotherhood in Islam, from an Islamic perspective, it supersedes all of the consanguineous blood relations, all of the other informal relations, all of the formal relationships that are outside that we have with different people, our businesses or jobs or other people in society. Brotherhood and ukhuwah supersedes that. It is one of the strongest bonds. Look at the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Ali ibn Abi Talib is the one who is ready to sleep in his bed and give his life for the Holy Prophet. The bond that they have is a special one, and that true reflection of brotherhood. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to go out, some of the children would pelt him with stones, would throw things at him. And it wouldn't be appropriate for the Prophet, as, a man, an adult, to say, I don't want to hit one of these kids in the head with one of these stones. But who came to the aid and the support and the defense of the Prophet? It was Amir al-Mu'mineen. As a young man, as a young child, he would chase these, kids that wanted to bother the Prophet away. He was a supporter, a protector. The bond was very deep. And that's what I want us to understand, is that brotherhood is a huge, important component. And I want you to think outside of the box, that, we hear brotherhood and sometimes we think specifically about brothers. Sometimes we think gender specific, but in its essence, brotherhood supersedes all of these different relationships, and it's about a spiritual bond. Actually, if we wanted to define this real connection, I would say that this is a spiritual bond for the sake of Allah through various virtuous acts. Those acts of sacrifice, of kindness, and so on and so forth, that are done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is part of that bond that is the realest of all bonds, right? By this definition. I remember a teacher of mine giving this some very deep context, because I posed the question, where does, in this depth of bond, where do spouses fall on the spectrum? Husband and wife, right? One of the closest people that you will ever be to in your life, obviously. And he said that the best of bonds are rooted in that same reality of brotherhood. Meaning that even for that husband and wife, if they have that, how do we define it? Right? That for that spiritual bond that's for the sake of Allah and manifests through these various virtuous acts of sacrifice and love and compassion and forgiveness and appreciation and altruism. That all of these things are part of the manifestation of that spiritual bond. We see that in Karbala. We see that in that connection that the Imam has for his brother, or that Imam Sajjad has for his father. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, while he was sick in Karbala, he was wanting and striving. He tried, it says, to get up and to want to go to the battlefield to defend not just his father, but his imam, his leader. This is a spiritual bond, in essence, that he was driven by. For the sake of Allah, to do a virtuous act. Of course, he was not well enough, but Abu al-Fadl Abbas, that was sacrifice. He would sacrifice everything for his imam. Lesson for us, obviously, in terms of our Imam Mahdi, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajum Sharif. So, we're getting to understanding where this race inequality fits in. Because in Islam, brotherhood and this spiritual bond is something that supersedes race. But we'll go into that more. It's not about the dismissal of the plight of African Americans or race at all. It's about actually the acknowledgement and the reality that even beyond this, the people are connected through their ruh, through their souls. And we have to understand that as that deeper connection. And when we understand that, then even though we are aware of the, for example, what a person who's African American like myself may go through in terms of the injustices of the system, but I begin to see that in order to be able to focus on the higher purpose of that spiritual bond. There's a lot that can be said, about this topic as well, and just wanted a little bit more, though, part of what the goal for us as human beings is to strive to reach our perfections. Right? And these perfections are either on an individual level, like, for example, self-purification on an individual level, and then this self-purification may be on a communal level, and that is what brotherhood is. If we want to look at the whole spectrum of what's the end communal goal, obviously for a person, self-purification, to do good, to be as God-conscious as they can, to reach the level where they're what? Inshallah, they're going to Jannah. They're going to paradise. They reach the highest of rewards. But in a communal sense, in a sense of the relationship of human beings with other human beings in the context of the world itself, that self-purification translates into how we maintain our relationships and what do they look like. Are they built on that spiritual bond for the sake of Allah through these virtuous acts or not? All right? And these two go together. They're not mutually exclusive. The self-purification at each level, they go hand in hand, right? So there's a lot of perfection that a person can do on an individual level, right? I can fast, I can pray, so on and so forth. But there's another level of test that comes when we have to deal with other people. Some of them are good, some of these people are not good, some of them are even oppressive. Some people are, not friendly. How do we manage and deal with this? This becomes the levels of test. On an individual level, I can make my salat, give khums, fast, do my a'mal for the holy months, and so on and so forth. But on a communal level, it's about my relationships and my interactions. How am I maintaining them? And this is where Shaitan is, he's waiting for the community, right? He's waiting to cause the slip-ups. He's waiting to make people feed into stereotypes, think negatively, have racist ideals, have these implicit biases that cause them to that guide them or a person to do ill things, which are counter to that brotherhood, counter to building community, counter to being a part of the whole purpose of the return of the Imam of our time. May Allah hasten his return. That he's coming to establish this justice, this real sense of community. What do those hadiths say? About you can go into the pocket of your brother in the time of the Imam. There will be no economic injustice. Someone can take their hand, go into the pocket of their brother, take what they need, and there be no problem. Well, I don't even need to get into all of the reasons why we are not at that space right now. You know, someone put their hands in somebody's pocket, they'd be in trouble. So, yes, there's these different kinds of tests, but they serve this purpose of helping us to get to that greater self-purification as a community, right? So if the community, it doesn't matter if one or two people are doing good or self-purifying themselves, but as a community, if as a group we're not able to overcome the test or the challenges, whatever they may be like, then we are not ready really to answer the call of the Imam. We're not ready to establish or go on the path of reaching that lofty goal that will be established through the zuhur of the Imam and the reappearance of the Imam. So we have to keep that brotherhood aspect in place. Next, we have to understand when we are talking about that lofty goal and the ideal scenario, that is exactly, it's important to think about what does that ideal society, that utopian society, or that the perfection of a community, even with its challenges and flaws, what would that look like for the Muslims? For the Muslims who are actually Muslim, right? For the Muslims that actually submit to Allah. Now, Allah said to do this. My religion said to do this. This is the way to get closer to Him. It's no rap. I'm on that path. I'm about that life, that mu'min life, right? To get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To achieve my potential in this world. So for a Muslim, what is the ideal? Right? Why? Let me explain why we have to understand what the ideal is. Because we need a frame of reference for what we are comparing to. Right? For example, a doctor might, at medical school, definitely you're going to study in depth the mechanics of the human body, how things should work. What's the heart supposed to do? How many beats per second? What is it? All the different details. I have to know what is it supposed to do in a good state, in its optimal state. Then if we see a heart working too hard, not able to work hard enough, other issues, then we can see that this, maybe in comparison to what's ideal, is not working, or is not working at its optimal form, optimal state. A mechanic has to know what a car is supposed to do. What's the engine supposed to do? What's this supposed to do? What is it supposed to run like? And then he can look back and see, oh, well, okay, this transmission, for example, or whatever, is not doing what it's ideally supposed to do. The reason why I'm emphasizing this understanding, this second point of understanding the ideal goal, is because we live in a sick society. So sick that the abnormal becomes normalized and accepted, right? Such a state of severe spiritual illness that we think that those things are the normal state. So then when we're trying to think about what a person should do, we're already judging our frame of reference is corrupt. For example, anger. It's looked at as so common, so normal, right? To the extent where this someone becoming angry, husbands and wives arguing with each other, parents with children, fighting or arguing or getting angry at each other, that this is considered, people driving and having road rage and get angry. All of this is not considered outside of the normal. It's considered, yeah, this is a part of life. This happens, this kind of petty anger. I mean, there could be a good anger where if something that angers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala angers us, in that way, that's good. But these kind of petty angers, or irrational anger, emotional anger, these are things which are do not behoove our spirit and our spiritual growth. Right? But if in society people start to look and think, yeah, that's normal. Yeah, no, husbands and wives fight all the time. Yeah, this is such a thing as normal. When this becomes normalized, then we have a problem because our frame of reference is corrupt. And if someone comes and says, well, this person, this is what anger looks like, they might look and say, oh, everybody's like that. People think this way. You know, I was doing counseling with a group of young people, young couples, and I really wanted to emphasize this idea that why do we have to live like this? Well, you know, people argue all the time. Married people argue all the time. I said, says who? According to who? Whose idea is this? Who wants to live like that? Right? Yet this may be something that society says is normal or fine, but why do we have to stoop to those standards? Why can't we raise our standards? Right? Why can't we live a different a life of true prosperity or true happiness? Right? So we want to make sure that we understand that in this ideal Muslim community, the ideal goal, there's zero room for any kind of racism, because our society and our goals has to be based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us and told us in the Quran, the verse that we recited, right? Yes, we made you into these different nations and tribes, different places, countries, but what Allah cares about the most and what matters is how close a person is to Him, meaning how close are they to their perfection, meaning how God conscious and virtuous are they? Where is their level? How pious are they? So ideal society, there can be no room for things which are harmful emotionally, spiritually. And racism is obviously a huge component. Means that, so the correct definition of racism is talking about a social injustice. Right? And sometimes people differentiate between racism and racial discrimination, where racism means that there is a systematic injustice, meaning that, for example, the reason why in America there's so much racism against African Americans is because of what the ruling class, what white supremacy has done systematically. There's a systematic component of injustice and oppression. Where, for example, slavery or Jim Crow. There's a lot of good books and content, and there's more, a lot more and more, it seems, these days, where people are talking about and putting into, good language. There's some other videos that talk about, those things. I would encourage that, you be up on reading, some of these things that really put into perspective, what's going on, or what the situation has been, or why, or what racism is. Because, sometimes these words are being used and people don't understand what they mean. Like when people say reverse racism. It's not a thing, right? Why do people think that it's a thing? Because they don't understand what racism is in the first place, right? It's not like reverse psychology. You just throw the reverse in there, and then you're talking about, oh, no, it's not like that. Right? So if there is a ruling class that benefits from so much of society just by virtue of their race or so-called race, then and they subjugate others through that process, that is what racism is. So if a people are never in a position, even though they may dislike someone of another race, but if the system or the systematic injustice is not such that they have any systematic benefits, then they can never be the perpetrators of racism. Right? Black people can never be the perpetrators of racism in the system where they are subjugated through race, through where the laws would benefit someone for whiteness or proximity to whiteness, which is its own dilemma that we definitely run into, and we're going to get into that as well. So, understanding what the ideal goal is helps us to understand that it's not such a thing that for a Muslim to have a society that has racism in it. It's not possible. If there is, then we have to acknowledge that we have a severe shortcoming. We have to acknowledge that there is a problem, and we have to, step one, just like in those Alcoholics Anonymous or different kind of addiction anonymous programs, a lot of times the very first step is to acknowledge that there's a problem. We're kind of in this phase, in the Muslim community that, racism is a thing. It's not something that Muslims are immune to. No, not at all. Not by a long shot. In fact, it would be worse because we have the beautiful teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, of the peace be upon them, of the Holy Quran. So for us to become perpetrators of racism after having this knowledge is a greater injustice. It's a major injustice. It's a zulm, right? And the second thing, after we acknowledge that there is a problem in the Muslim community, step two, we have to refuse to be indifferent. We have two choices. We either want to be part of the problem or we want to be part of the solution. What's it going to be? A mode of operation for a lot of people is to just ignore it. Not my problem. Maybe it'll go away. I'll just keep quiet. But that is part of the problem itself. The enablers. The people who, when there's racism happening in our masjids, in our centers, or in a society, we find a way to stick our head in the sand, hide behind something, we don't not get involved, remain quiet, ignore it. This is all part of the problem. Right? This is what it means to be a Yazidi. This is what it means to be a Shimr. Someone who is in opposition of Islamic ideals. And I know that people don't like to think about themselves or their parents or their uncle or their masjid or whoever as being someone who is in opposition of Islam, in opposition of God, being someone who is on the level of Yazid and Shem as perpetrators of crimes against Islam, against humanity. People don't like to think of themselves like that. They like to think, I'm not so bad, right? The kind of anti-hero sentiment that is just, well, you know, maybe I do some things, but I'm not that bad. But when you are quiet, you're an enabler. You allow for these things to happen. And unless we want to be in that category, then we have to take that very seriously. And step one, acknowledge there's a problem. Step two, choose a side. Part of the problem or part of the solution. If you're part of the solution, then what are you doing for that solution? How are you fixing? What steps are you taking? At the individual level and at the communal level. If you're part of the problem, then this is all about what we're talking about. Time to switch sides. Get with the good guys. The root of this problem. This brings us to the next point, which is, what are the roots of this problem? How does racism even exist for someone who's Muslim even? How can that be possible when we're saying that these things don't fit in the same space? Love of the dunya is the source of the problem. The root of all the evil. I would, whenever I see people, especially immigrants that come to America, with someone, or Canada, or anywhere in the West for that matter, and I see the people loving this country because they got some benefit, they're able to turn the blind eye to the injustices that happen, especially to African Americans, especially to black people in Canada and in America. They're able to somehow turn their eye. Well, you know, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to go to some protest. They start their love for the dunya, which is the same thing. This false patriotism, or whatever you want to call it, is a root cause of racism. Why? Because it causes them to become enablers. Now, I'm living the good life. I came from wherever, and now, you know, I'm in this country or this land. I love it. I have a good job, or I'm going to school, whatever. I don't want to rock the boat. I'm getting a lot of benefit. And so because of that, that love of the dunya causes me to enable racism. Remember, I'm part of the problem and solution. So what is that person a part of? Yes, the problem. That's the problem. Because what does it mean? It means that their value of this of the dunya and what they and what they think it means for them is more important than justice itself. The other aspect is, and I kind of put these together. I think they're a little connected. They definitely can be their own topics, but for the sake of time, I want to consolidate tokenism and colorism. All right. Tokenism. I remember it's the idea that like, for example, somebody will say, "Well, I'm not a racist because I have a black friend." I can't be racist. I have a black friend. Or I can't be racist. I married a black person. And inherently, that doesn't mean you solved your problems or your mental state or understanding. Not necessarily. And more pervasive tokenism, where it's like, let's, representation. Let's have one person, who's black, like, in a movie. Let's have one person who's black in a sitcom. Let's have one person who's black on a panel of speakers. One person who's black or a couple. This is tokenism, right? And it's still problematic because it doesn't address the issues, but it's a kind of false solution where someone actually, it's almost like, when these things happen, it's almost like it's a way for people to feel good about themselves. Right? Like, there was a scholar, and he was at a event or program. So he tells to colleagues that, scholar or professor, he says to his colleagues that, they only invited me here because I'm black. Right? Not because of the content of my character, not because of, my know-how, my academic prowess, not because of books I've written. No, because I am black, I need to fill this slot. That's how they are seeing it, right? And that in and of itself means that I'm not understanding the complexity of things. Or if I'm understanding and I'm fixing it a little bit, but am I doing this, and this becomes a question about our niyat and intention, am I doing this as a way to just feel good about myself? So the person who, I have one black friend, I'm not racist, this person wants to feel okay about their life and their benefits from whiteness or proximity to whiteness. I think that it's important to understand that part of what tokenism also does is what we talked about earlier about this, the real identity of a human being is a spiritual identity. But what it does is it negates and just ignores, throws it away. This the reality of a human being, what they know, who they are, what kind of character they have. And it shifts the focus to, yes, they have a little bit of something, but they're black. So, they can fill this void, or they can talk about this topic, or they can make us look like we're caring of, a situation. I remember there's a interfaith group, and they didn't even realize that they were not truly interfaith. They had a bunch of different Christian clergy on their board or part of their group or whoever. They had an occasional a Jewish person who would occasionally come. They had no Muslim at all, and they felt like they were a good representation of interfaith. Why? Because they had someone Catholic and someone Baptist and someone Methodist and someone Protestant, and so these different factions or different sects of Christianity were promoting as we're interfaith, but they were really intrafaith almost. They had one Jewish person, which I guess made that interfaith, in their eyes. But the presence of, when they wanted to add someone Muslim to their organization, They didn't care what kind of content. They're all, are you Muslim? You can fill this void because you could be Muslim and be in this space. You know? And they didn't. It didn't matter about so much about, you know, what type of person they were or how knowledgeable they were, or things like that. And so tokenism can defeat, you know, this lofty goal of what it means to have a sense of community. It's like, you know, as a black person, you don't want to always be the black something, the black doctor, the black athlete, the black politician, the black author, the black this, right? Like because it becomes so much focus on the aspect of race where it's almost used in a way that it negates your actual accomplishments, right? And that becomes problematic. That becomes its own problem, where that value of you as a human being is not there. Where what you accomplish, well, you know, we'll just put black in front of it, and it becomes that essence of tokenism. Colorism. This is a really important one because I find that when people are talking about race, in addition to sometimes it not being clear for them what that means, especially in America, but this shadeism and colorism also play a very big role, right? So it becomes, even in a lot of other societies where you have a spectrum of complexion, and the closer you are to whatever is considered whiteness is what's considered good, acceptable, or attractive, or part of the dominant culture. And the further you are from that on the spectrum, it's considered not good, considered bad. This is really pervasive in a lot of communities. I think that coming from, and we have to think about this, America is this melting pot. You know, Canada is this melting pot. People coming from all over, migrating from different places, different lands. And so the diversity is unique. Whereas maybe in a lot of countries, a lot of back home countries, people are more along the same spectrum. And so how people see and view race and color is oftentimes very different in some places than it is in North America. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the one-drop rule, but basically, and you can Google it and look into more of the details, but it's the idea was that what it meant to be black. First of all, whiteness meant freedom. It meant you could own property. It meant that, you know, you had certain rights that being black you did not have. So there was concern about, well, what if someone has African ancestry at all? You know, maybe their grandparents, one of them was black. And maybe they don't look dark. Maybe they look what they call passing for white. How should they be perceived? And so this idea of this one-drop rule, where if you had one drop of African ancestry in you, then you're considered black. Part of why in North America or in a lot of the West, someone of any complexion on the many shades of, you know, from light skin to medium, brown skin, dark skin, or blue-black, you know, very dark skin hues, all of these are part of what it means to be black and also a part of the black experience. But at the same time, even within that, the closer you become to whiteness, there become certain privileges and benefits that exist. Certain things that, don't happen. All right, we've seen too many times, a white person go and mass shoot up a place. That recent incident that was very unfortunate in Georgia, where the guy kills multiple East Asian women and is humanized by the sheriff and police officers. Don't even get me started on this, people. I cannot stand the U.S. law enforcement. But the point is that what was acceptable, what this person did, this tragic, and many other these instances, there's an extreme disparity between what happens when you encounter law enforcement and you're black versus and you're white. This person who murdered people was being humanized by the law enforcement that's talking about him. He had a bad day. Had a bad day? What about those people that got killed? They didn't. They had the worst possible day. But that's the nature of the systematic problem that I'm talking about. This colorism becomes a big problem because within communities, and distinguish and focus on, and I'm not saying everyone, but as an example, some marriage website where they ask you this question about what's your complexion. Are you wheat or honey or I don't know, this or that, or I'm like all these are kind of brown, but it's so important, and this kind of almost caste system based off of where people fall on the spectrum. It's a big deal, and in a lot of cultures, in a lot of Arab cultures, the same way, Iranian culture, Afghan culture, where do people fall on the spectrum? How they get treated in their own societies? There's discrimination that happens, racial discrimination that happens even internally in this way, this kind of colorism, right? Not call it racial discrimination, this kind of colorism and shading that happens internally. So when people come to America or a place where there's this whole another level of diversity, that translates and continues over, and why it's so unfortunate that within our communities a sense of people go and, I know many people. I mean, I would even go so far as to say that almost every single black person I know, Muslim, that has gone to a mosque or a center or masjid event that was organized predominantly by immigrant Muslims of primarily whatever background, at some point every single one of the black people I know had some experience of racism. Every single one. I mean, I don't think I know a single person who did not have this experience. Not that that's impossible, but this is a reality of how serious this is. I could say even myself, tons of examples. It's a different story, not getting into all of those details, but it's happening and it exists. This colorism is so pervasive that I remember reading a tweet from a well-known scholar that said, because there's some debate on the mother of Imam Mahdi, Ajalullah Ta'ala Farajul Sharif, in terms of where she was from exactly, what was her ethnicity, what did she look like, or her complexion. And in a nutshell, there's different opinions, but understanding that many of the imams had wives that were of some African descent, likely their children had features, complexions, or hair which was similar to many other people who are black or of African descent. But this, anyway, going back to the tweet, it said that the one thing we know about Imam Mahdi is that he's going to be an olive complexion. And I'm, shortening the tweet, but it was very interesting. It was almost defensive that this scholar felt the need to highlight that, yes, some people may have a debate that they think that the Imam will be black, but I want to assure you that he's definitely going to be an olive complexion. Don't worry. As if it's, one of the scariest things, and to say it so definitively, there's no room for discussion or debate, about different views or anything from the way that it was presented. It was almost as if, it's saying that, okay, no one's disputing Imam Jawad alayhi salam. Isn't that enough for you guys? You got one person. Isn't that enough? Well, that connection, that a lot of times that connection of even people in roles of leadership to the idea of whiteness and that being goodness is so problematic that it translates into this racism even within our communities, right? It's the reason why you see these images of, Imam Ali or Imam Hussein or, different imams, and it looks like, a lot of the images look very Persian-esque, very fair-skinned, and you've seen the pictures. I don't have to describe them. But the point is that even though there's some traditions that talk about a darkness in the skin of so many of the different imams, that what they look like that isn't counter to that image, it's still an image that's being promoted, and it's people, when they a lot of times get to those traditions, they're off-put. So why is that? That is because of that, again, not just the hope of the dunya, meaning that I love material things, but even loving this idea of whiteness. This is hope of dunya. Oh, I get so much benefits by this, right? I'm accepted, or I'm the dominant class, or part of that, whatever that means. Then the next thing that I want to highlight is color blindness. And what does that mean, right? Because we talked about how, from an Islamic standpoint, the reality of humanity is their spiritual essence. That's what's most important, their taqwa. Then at the same time, we want to we're talking about so we're kind of ignoring the issue of color in one way, but we're kind of also highlighting it in another way, because Islam has acknowledged the differences in people's colors and the differences in their languages and these unique things that each person has, right? There's a poem that I find it very interesting and kind of humorous, and I'm not sure who the author actually is, and it says, and it's called, "And You Have the Nerve to Call Me Colored," and basically it's written from the perspective of someone who is black and colored, which was a term, and again, part of why I think it's important to read these different books and also to just know people who are black and interact with them, not tokenism, one black friend, one black sheikh, or one black person that I know, but the regular interactions. Why is this important? Is, one, it's a part of the land and the people who live here and understanding, but two, it's also part of the people who are oppressed, right? And there's a special reverence in Islam for oppressed people. and it's a part of our duty as Muslims to uplift and support oppressed people. How are we doing that, right? Anyway, it's this idea of colorism and shadeism and all of that. This poem kind of talks about how because black people are called colored people, and well, again, this is a little bit different conversation, but it may be offensive to say colored people right today, but you can say people of color, and there's some reasons behind that. But anyway, those nuances and details are important because it's the difference between being offensive to someone or not. But anyway, it's called You Have the Nerve to Call Me Colored. When I was born, I was black. When I grew up, I was black. When I'm sick, I'm black. When I go out in the sun, I'm black. When I'm cold, I'm black. When I die, I'll be black. But you, when you're born, you're pink. When you grow up, you're white. When you're sick, you're green. And when you go out in the sun, you go red. And when you're cold, you go blue. And when you die, you'll be purple. And you have the nerve to call me colored. I mean, it's humorous. But it's highlighting, like, what is that? It's highlighting, what does it mean? Right? Why are we so attached to this also? And why was there a system entirely built on the idea that if you're white, you're superior and everything else is not white? When they started the one drop rule, it became such that they felt like, we're going to be in trouble if we go down this road too much. Meaning that the idea of, especially in America and in Canada, that there's this absolute pure race or pure whiteness is almost mythical, just because of the backgrounds of people and people being mixed with so many different things. I mean, their ancestry and everything like that. I remember doing my own, DNA test at one time, and there was an article about African Americans who almost never had 100% African DNA, that they could just trace all of their roots 100%. There was always this 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% of European ancestry. I mean, and considering the transatlantic slave trade and the selling and rape of so many black people and African people, unfortunately, that a degree of oppression is part of, that reason. Thomas Jefferson is famous for having, so many black kids, or mixed kids, if you want to call them. But by the one drop rule, black kids. But at the same time, different paths for these children of the president, some who are white and some who are black. But this colorism, again, is, I think, part of the bigger problem because it has impeded the process of understanding for many people. And in a lot of places where Muslims live, the way that they view race is different still than in a place like America. And so, people will say things like, oh, don't go in the sun too much, you'll get dark. Very common. I've heard in multiple contexts from people coming from, Middle Eastern, South Asian, backgrounds. And so there's a affinity towards, there's benefits towards going to that proximity to whiteness. That mentality is part of the problem. I mean, it's the source of the problem. Right? And until we rectify the mentality that is, again, this is anti-Islam. We don't like Yazid and Shimr and all of these people, Ibn al-Jam, because they fought against Islam. What difference does it make for the person who champions these anti-Islamic ideals? Inshallah, Allah give us all the tawfiq and success to be able to realize this reality of the message of the Quran, and inna akramakum indallah atqakum, that the most noble of you in God's eyes is the most pious of you, inshallah. Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We'll go through a couple of questions that received. I'll read the questions and inshallah try to jump into an answer as well. The first question that we have is about interracial marriages. It says, interracial marriages are still looked down upon in large parts of the Shia community. What can individuals and the community as a whole do to tackle this issue? Great question. And I like that it's asking twofold, as an individual, as a community, like, how we touched on as well, that there's these two aspects, but they kind of go together as well. Number one, I'd say, can you ask them to listen to this speech or this program or many of the other programs that have kind of touched on this topic? If it's considered a sensitive or taboo topic for the community, then we have to start to delve into it. There's nothing so harmful as bad communication, when you're in any dynamic. Avoiding a topic, not talking about it or whatever doesn't help either. So I think we have to encourage the listening, and wherever the obstacles are, I think we have to have the conversations. Number two, marry into other races. I think that's an easy solution. Marry people of other races. Have interracial marriages, and again, not as a kind of pity tokenism, thing. It's a jihad. Let's, everyone marry black people. This is the jihad and the struggle for the believers. No, marry good people, right? That's what we should seek. Good people, people of character. What? Piety, God consciousness. But we shouldn't distinguish or differentiate if someone, between people, because of the complexion of their skin or their phenotype, facial features, their ethnicity, or things like that. We have to really give importance to those spiritual values and that spiritual bond and connection. So marry into other races, meaning be open to marrying people of other races. Encourage this. I would encourage every single person. Find a good person, those people who are still seeking a spouse. Finding a good person is priceless. And it's more valuable than anything a complexion or language or ethnicity can do for anyone. I mean, there is no guarantee for someone that if they marry someone and they're the same race as you, that they're going to be a good person. I think we underestimate how valuable that is. Ask people who are married, especially people who've had a bad marriage. Don't they wish and pray that they had something good, or that they had married someone good, that they didn't focus on, something trivial and superficial and not important in comparison? The misunderstanding of interracial marriage or seeing looked down upon, that means an overall community or overall education has to happen. If you're watching this, I hope that you watched it and took notes about what you can do, or ask questions about anything you didn't understand. That's how we begin to make progress. Otherwise, in one ear, out the other, until the next program, similar to this one. And number three, put your center through what I call your masjid, your center, your community. Put them through the IMSS test, the Interracial Marriage Support Standard Test. No, that's not an actual thing as far as I know anyway. I just made that up. But it's a real idea. I mean, it's a real concept. It's not made up in that sense. But it's not an official standard. But what do I mean by that? Put your community through the IMSS test. It means test your community to see, are they able to support someone from a different background? Or are they able to, is the community able to embrace people of different ethnicities and backgrounds? Is it okay for a black person to be on the board, to be head of something, or to be an active part of the community, or many different people? Is that a thing in our community or not? Right? If we can't, it's not necessarily helpful for someone, I met a good person, I'm mentally prepared that that racism, I don't want to be a Yazidi anti-Muslim person. So this person is a good person, I marry them. They're black, they're a good person, they're a good Muslim, alhamdulillah. Okay, next step, now they're a part of a community and system that is not good or not supportive, then that's a problem. It doesn't mean that I don't get married, but it means that I have to do work to help my community to become more supportive, set some standards, and meet them. I was talking about this with a group of young people, and they, the question came up of how to do that, how to help make the community. And there's a lot of ideas. And in our last session, last time we had, I mentioned several ideas as well. There's other videos and things to look at. Don't want to go over all of them. But one of them is get feedback. Right? Someone who is African American or African Canadian or African descent, when someone black comes into our center, what kind of experience do they have? Have they had? Even retrospectively, looking back at people who have come, maybe reaching out and doing a survey. What's your feedback of our center, our masjid, our event? How did you find it? Let people share feedback. I think that a lot of people will be open to do this because of so many of the experiences that they had, and no one ever asks. No one ever tries to find out. No one ever asks for, feedback about things that they can actually do better and take it seriously. And this kind of survey and feedback, this is a very important Islamic concept. It's a type of consultation. It's a type of a reassessment and self-reflection and muhasabah and doing that kind of self-accounting so that we can become better. Think about how Imam Ali alayhi salam, he would say that you should test people before you trust them. That someone's a fool if they trust before they test. So we have to test our own communities even sometimes and get feedback and learn about what we can do better. Imam Ali alayhi salam used to go through the bazaar incognito, right? And so that he can get a sense of, are people upselling or overselling, overpriced things, and what does it look like? How are people living? Like a real hands-on feel. This is an important part of leadership, as well, to have your pulse on your hand on the pulse of the community. So for one of the things that that this supports is finding out subtly, this kind of incognito mode, but finding out subtly how were things for you? Like, how are the interactions? Even if they could be, anonymous, feedback or surveys. But there has to be a way for the community to learn and know how things were and how things went well or not, I think it should be done generally speaking as well for these feedback forms. But I think because the issue of racism, especially within our communities, is still such a problem, I think that this should be focused on. People who frequent the community, for example, who are black, or people who are who have in the past. I think we should find out these things. And the last thing, seek the support of the ulama. Seek the support of scholars who are down, who are aware, who understand that this is an issue and a concern. Seek their support to help to facilitate things. If somebody's a young person wants to get married, they're like, I want to marry this person. They're like, nope, they're two shades too dark, son, daughter, whoever. That's not going to fly. If their parents are giving them problem, that's where the ulama have to come in and speak to these parents and talk to these families and fix those issues. Or in a community to help to facilitate. If there's hesitancy, then someone has to help to bridge the gap. That's an important role that ulama can help with, in addition to, just general importance of premarital counseling. There's so much work done around educating the community. We have to educate the community about this, about that, about this topic, about that topic. And that is true and that's important. But we also have to educate the people who are educating. Right? So if you think about, even Rasulullah, his circle of, trusted companions were people who are receiving that, edification and that self-purification process and self-building and learning, through them to become better, because they were going to be the people who go and there's, indirectly the voice of the Prophet and helping the people and so on and so forth. So in most times in masjids, communities, you have your board, you got your youth groups, maybe you have a scholar or different people who are volunteers and active. And that is wonderful and great, but it is not great when those people and those volunteer positions are not progressing, because they directly impact the broader community, right? So this understanding of what is racism, what is colorism, how do we fix this, that's conversations that first and foremost have to happen as intensive learning or education or workshops, whatever it may be, with the people who are in positions to help facilitate the education of the community as a whole. Inshallah. Question number 2. It mentions about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentions there is no difference between a white and a black person, or an Arab and an Ajam, or non-Arab. What does that mean? Does this mean that Islam doesn't see color, or does this mean that Islam places significance on color? And we touched just briefly about the color blindness and what does that mean. So let's first clarify a couple things. When we say see color, right? On one hand, this is really kind of a technicality, but we don't want to conflate things, because when you conflate how people are defining terms, you get to different conclusions, right? Because different understandings or different meanings of what does that mean. So let's get into it a little bit. So yes, on one hand, Islam definitely sees colors, and it acknowledges, all people and their differences, right? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ. From amongst the signs of Allah's creation of the heavens and the earth is the differences in your languages and your colors. It's one of the great signs of Allah. Again, speaking to that intentionality, or God being intentional in this process. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. There's signs in this for people who know and who reflect, when you start to think about the reality that God made all of these differences in their colors and so on and so forth. So about this color blindness, or does Islam see it? On one hand, Islam is the Quran, Allah is acknowledging, they're different colors, different languages, different cultures. That means language is a reflection of culture. No problem with that. This is one of the signs of Allah, right? And again, putting that with the other ayah, from Surah Hujarat. By the way, this is from Surah Al-Rum. Putting this together, we understand that still the best of you is the most pious of you The best of you is the one who's most honorable, most pious, most God-conscious in God's eyes. So, in reality, though, Islam does not see any preference in color. We are spiritual beings. In God's eyes, there is no inherent value in ethnicity or color or nationality. On the day of judgment, it's all about the deeds, dude. All about the deeds. You know, what good deeds have you brought? What virtues have you brought? What hasanat have you brought? Right? But let's differentiate what Islam is saying about color versus what people are saying. When people say they don't see color, what do they mean? They mean, I want to ignore color. They mean, I want to ignore the particulars of your existence as they relate to your color or race. That's what it often means when people say it. This kind of color blindness that they want to champion, right? And I wanted to make an analogy to kind of hit home. I think that, you know, if you, that someone who has a physical disability, for example, if they have a handicap or something that they can't walk, they cannot walk up steps or can't walk at all. Perhaps they're wheelchair bound. They can't use stairs. This I don't see color approach that we hear about in society, it would be like standing next to a building that has stairs and no ramp and not saying anything. Standing with someone who is disabled and cannot walk up those stairs and just ignoring the plight and the concern that this person has. I don't see wheelchairs. I don't see, disabilities. That's actually a cop-out. It's ignoring the reality of a situation. How can you ignore that this person can't get up the steps that they need to get up? That there's, for example, no ramp. It's disrespectful. It's offensive. It's harmful. It's ill-spirited. It's ill-natured. It's selfish. It's disgusting. Right? How can I look at the reality of a person's existence and ignore that part of them? It's like people who looked at Imam Husayn alayhi salam, the grandson of the Prophet, and they're going to ignore the reality of who he is, and we're going and go to war with him in Karbala. So, yes, Islam places importance on accepting people, whatever their color and background is. This is inna fi dhalika la'ayatin lil alamin. But at the same time, we know that the final exam and the day of judgment, that only akramakum indallah atqakum matters, right? And not to conflate that issue of that race not being a matter of concern from an Islamic standpoint, to confuse that with advocating for the people who are oppressed, especially by virtue of their race. Right? That's wherever you see, for example, Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about it so much, about the importance of standing against oppression, oppressors, helping the oppressed. And so we can't ignore that reality. And lastly, we don't want to confuse it with what is being, the way that it's being utilized in the media and in, a lot of spaces, the way that it's trending in our society right now, where when people say that they don't see color and that it's just a cop-out and a way to ignore the plight of people who are victims of some kind of social injustice because of their race. And it promotes this idea that meritocracy is a reality, or it is the same despite the many different kinds of opposition that a person faces just by virtue of their skin color, right? You know, there's a hashtag going around, you've probably seen, Black Excellence. And I will tell you, part of the story behind Black Excellence is that if you're black and good, it's not good enough. Because if you're black and good as being an attorney, good doctor or something like that, there's, right now in the education world, there's a massive shortage of special education teachers. Amongst the special education teachers that exist, there's a tremendously less, an even greater shortage, rather, of teachers of color, especially African American, especially male. So now you have this very specific, limited demographic, and there's so many trials and tribulations. And there was a person, an educator, talking about how they know an excellent teacher who's African American, special education teacher, and a male, and he couldn't get a job at places that they were just throwing these jobs at any person who was a white woman who applied. And that's in the education world. That's the majority of the teachers who are white women. That's something that in and of itself that needs to be rectified. But it speaks to the severity of this issue. And for the last question, why is equality an important concept in Islam, whether between races, genders, or social status? Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put so much emphasis on this concept? For example, we see this in Hajj and in the way pilgrims need to act and dress to portray equality. It's important for us to remember what Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, has said. That justice is the foundation and the asas for the entire universe. The entire universe that God created is built upon the axis and basis of justice. You want to understand what happens when we remove this justice and remove this equality? You have complete chaos. You have this slavery, like we've seen hundreds of years in America. You have Jim Crow laws in America. You will have mayhem, imbalance, injustice. All of these things are the result of removing that equality. And Allah creates for the purpose of good. Allah creates for purpose. This goal of humanity, of human beings, individually and as a community. So Islam has put emphasis on this. Why? Because this is the standard of existence in this world. It is based on equality and justice. Remove that, you have zulm, you have oppression, injustice, chaos, mayhem, and so on and so forth. The last point that I want to make is that we have to remember that when we're talking about equality, we are talking about that from what? An Islamic standpoint. What does Islam say about equality and equity? Because right now in Canada, in America, equality means all kinds of things. Equality means same-sex marriages. Equality means, riba and usury. These are things that are considered a part of equality in the society. So when we are talking about equality and what Islam has to say about it, we definitely have to look at the Islamic perspective, and which essentially is وَضْعُ الشَّيْءِ فِي مَحَلِّهِ, everything being put into its proper place, whatever that may be. Sameness is not necessarily fairness, right? From an Islamic standpoint, the responsibility of a child is different from a parent. The responsibility of husbands may be different from wives. The responsibility of teachers may be different from students. And every person has their place, their roles, and this is what makes everything fit together. Doing everything, have everybody having to have the same role and do the same thing, that's what's being championed as equality. That's actually chaos. It's the opposite of equality. Why should children have the same status as parents, or the same responsibilities rather? Right? So we want to promote fairness and equity and the reality of what equality is and justice, not just sameness. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all more tawfiq and more success. I apologize if some things were a little more lengthy. This topic is very important, and all of these topics and subtopics are very important. And again, I want to, especially thank all of the participants, all of the organizers and volunteers, also Sister Sakina Hasib, and everyone who supported the program. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all more tawfiq and success, that we may see the straight path and walk vigilantly and steadfast upon it, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.